Hello, everybody, and welcome. Hello, good to see you. My name is Kim Daniels. I'm the director of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life, where we work to bring the principles of Catholic social thought to national and global conversations, build bridges across religious and ideological and other divisions, and help young people see their faith as essential to their life and work. I want to welcome all of you here to Georgetown School of Continuing Studies for this Salt and Light gathering on young adults in this election year, rebuilding broken trust in institutions and leaders. We've had a great response to this conversation with all of you with us here at Georgetown, as well as over 500 of you who are joining us online. We've held over 175 gatherings since our founding 11 years ago, and are so glad that since we began streaming, we've been able to bring these conversations to over 350,000 people nationally and internationally. And so for those of you who can't watch tonight, for your friends, our conversation will be recorded and posted for later viewing at our site. So as the United States faces this divisive presidential election in November, we also face a crisis of trust in our nation, especially among young people. Younger generations are losing trust in government, economic institutions, media, and organized religion. This dialogue will explore the causes of diminishing faith in political and social institutions through the lens of Catholic social thought. Tonight, we've brought together 4 remarkable leaders for this conversation. They are Yuval Levin, the Director of Social, Cultural, and Constitutional Studies at the American Enterprise Institute, where he also holds the Beth and Ravenel Curry Chair in Public Policy. Yuval served as a member of the White House Domestic Policy staff under President George W. Bush. Sister Eilish McCullough, the Grassroots Education and Organizing Specialist at Network of Advocates for Catholic Social Justice, where she works with religious congregations and their sponsored ministries to develop advocacy skills. Brandon Vaidyanathan, a professor of sociology and the director of the Institutional Flourishing Lab at the Catholic University of America. Brandon is the author of Mercenaries and Missionaries, Capitalism and Catholicism in the Global South. And Justin Vassallo, a columnist at Compact Magazine and contributor to Commonweal Magazine, specializing in American political development, political economy, party systems, and ideology. Moderating our conversation tonight will be my wonderful colleague, Anna Gordon, the program director of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. And so with that, please join me in welcoming this wonderful group.
Thanks, Kim. It's so great to be back here at SCS after a summer break. We run on an academic schedule. It's great to see so many new faces, so many familiar faces, and so glad to have so many of you joining us online. Tonight we're going to talk about our institutions and our leaders. Here in the United States tonight, we're exactly 6 weeks away from a divisive presidential election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. As Catholics and people of faith, we're called to engage in politics, and in the words of Pope Francis, participate for the common good. He reminds us that good Catholics immerse themselves in politics by offering the best of themselves so that leaders can govern. But polls and experience over the past several years show us that younger generations are losing trust in government, economic institutions, media, organized religion, and others. A Gallup survey just last year in 2023 found that Gen Z had low levels of trust in institutions like Congress, the presidency, the news, large technology companies, the Supreme Court, and the criminal justice system. A 2019 Pew survey found a similar pattern, that Americans under 30 have lower levels of confidence in religious leaders, police officers, and business leaders compared to those older than them. So with this outstanding group we have here tonight, we're going to explore the root causes of this diminishing trust in our political and social institutions through the lens of Catholic social thought. We'll also explore how these media narratives, political missteps, public policy, and other forces have contributed to growing distrust, and how young people can hold institutions accountable and help restore integrity and rebuild confidence in these institutions. When we get to the Q&A period at the end of our hour, we'll be taking questions from our audience here at SCS And for those on the live stream, you can join in the conversation using the hashtag #RebuildingTrustGU and by tagging GUCST Public Life on X and Instagram. So I'm going to begin by asking all of our panelists here an opening comment, and I'm going to start with you, Yuval. What is the most important factor contributing to the erosion of trust in political and social institutions and their leaders among young adults?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me here for this wonderful conversation with this extraordinary group. I think I would answer that question with a seemingly straightforward and simple point, that the problem we face is not that we are not trusting enough, but that we are not trustworthy enough. The factor driving the loss of trust is a loss of trustworthiness in leaders, in institutions, but in general. Americans are losing trust in one another, not just in their big institutions, not just in national leaders, finding it difficult to build relationships of trust even in their own lives. This is, again, especially true for younger people, but it's true for Americans in general. And I think it means that the question for us in thinking about how to address this kind of problem is not only to ask about other people, how can we trust them more, what do they need to do, but to also ask about ourselves. What would it mean to be more trustworthy in 21st century America? And I think putting the question that way, both about other people and about ourselves, forces us to ask where trustworthiness comes from, where this peculiar ability to trust in someone comes from. What is it that it takes for people to be able to trust us and to trust one another? And it seems to me that a lot of that has to do with demonstrating responsibility and restraint, demonstrating that you are an agent of other people in the world, that you do work for them as well as for yourself. And I think a lot of our leaders and a lot of our institutions have very frankly failed to show us that, and have given the impression that they are here more to ask for our attention than to ask for our trust, that they're trying to build a following, that they're trying to build a profile, rather than that they're trying to build a community or trying to build modes of trust. And so I think to begin to ask the question of how can we trust more, we have to ask the question, how can we be more trustworthy?
Sister Eilish, how about you? What is the most important factor contributing to this lack of trust?
You know, I think I'm thrilled to be here and to be able to talk about this. For me, I think about, the Gen Z group. They have come of age in a time of just rampant change. And where, you have gun violence. They've come of age with Sandy Hook. They've come of age with the Black Lives Matter protests. And it's been this upheaval that's been constant. And at the same time, they are crying out and saying, what are we going to do for the change? We have to change something. And then when you see that the changes that you want to see are not being made or are being made more slowly, it causes an erosion of trust in the systems and institutions that are supposed to be making those changes and looking out for people.
Absolutely. Brandon, let's come to you. What's an important factor to consider?
Yeah, when I thought about your question, you'd asked about trust in both institutions and leaders, and I think there's maybe a distinction there, right? So the image that first came to mind was of experiencing maybe a breakup or betrayal in a relationship, and then you say, well, I'm never going to date another woman or man ever again. They're all untrustworthy, right? So there's a sense in which that kind of experience I think has happened to us, and often we've seen in the data, with younger people that among the reasons for why they don't trust their leaders, words like inauthenticity, right, or a sense that here's a person who is a hypocrite. They say something and do something else. But I think that repeated experience has led to a loss of the ideal, right? There's a lack of love in the institution, whether it's democracy or whether it's in science. I don't know if there's good data on that, but that's my suspicion, that if you were to be able to measure a sense of the value of the ideal or love for the ideal, that would have declined as well.
Justin, what is an important factor that we should consider?
Well, thank you. I'm grateful to be here. I would say quite pointedly, just rising inequality, oligarchy, and frankly, very obvious signs of increasing plutocracy. Now, it's not an original answer, but we've been hearing for over 15 years about a winner-take-all economy. Political scientists such as Jacob Hacker and Paul Pearson have talked about this. It's been well documented in numerous studies. And it's very worthwhile that the media is finally addressing some of these issues. But I think what's different now is that a narrative has really become cemented that things are broken. Our political system is broken and our economic system is broken. So I think I'm turning 39 in November. I think any younger person coming of age today, they've basically grown up with a narrative that is really lacking in hope. And there's not the kind of optimism or sense of momentum that the post-war generation experienced, or even the generation after that. And I think it's an incredibly distressing situation.
Well, I'm looking forward to unpacking that more. Yuval, I want to come back to you and actually maybe take a step back. Your work focuses on what it takes for families, communities, and our country to flourish. And one of your answers in your book, A Time to Build, everyone should go buy a copy, one of your answers is that we need flourishing institutions. So you believe in these institutions that have let us down, and you remind us that we're not just loose individuals bumping into each other, but parts of a larger whole. Help us set the context for this conversation. How and why did young Americans lose this trust in organized religion, government, media? And what are the costs of this, and how do we restore that broken trust?
Yeah, it's a very large question. I would say, first of all, we don't really have a choice about whether to have strong institutions and flourishing lives or not. We need them. And people without power and wealth in our society especially need them. And so are especially in need of functional institutions, so that when they break down, when we lose our confidence in them, we have to take steps to help them be stronger. The breakdown of the family doesn't present us with the option of doing without the family. It presents us with the challenge of strengthening it again, finding ways to help it work again for us. And the same is true in our politics, the same is true throughout our society. We have to, first of all, I think, see what institutions are and what they do for us. Obviously, it's a very large question, but I would say, broadly speaking, that institutions are the forms of our common life. They're not just groups of people, they're groups of people organized together around a common purpose. And an institution, therefore, gives each of those people a role in relation to that purpose and in relation to one another. If there's a school, there are teachers, there's a principal, there are parents, there are students. They each have a role to play. They're all playing those roles in pursuit of the same goals, and that's a functional institution. All of our institutions at different levels work in that way, and it's when we fail to play those roles, and especially when people with authority, when people in charge, fail to play the roles assigned to them, but instead try to elevate themselves, instead try to advance their own interest at the expense of the goal of the larger institution, of the family, of the community, of the legislature, of the company, that we begin to see both a loss of trust and a loss of function. And I think we've seen a lot of that happen in the 21st century in many important American institutions, where you look at the people in charge and you have to say, that person is not playing the constrained, focused role of service assigned to them in this institution. They're trying to use the institution as a platform to elevate themselves and to elevate their own profile. You see that this is how a lot of members of Congress now think about Congress. It's how a lot of CEOs think about their role. It's how a lot of people with authority in general in our society now think. They don't allow their roles to shape them into agents of other people enough. And I think at the end of the day, that as we see that degrade, you see a loss of trust in general. So you can give a narrow answer to why we lose trust in each of these institutions, right? There's a reason why people lost trust in banks in 2012. There's a reason why we might have lost trust in public health officials during the pandemic. But the fact that we've lost trust in all of these institutions at the same time over the course of 2 generations tells us that there's a larger story here, and I think we should be attuned to that too.
So what does all of this mean ahead of the November elections? We are coming right up against it. What would you say to young people, or anyone they believe that our political institutions and those leaders have completely lost all integrity and all credibility? Why should we participate in politics when the system is so broken?
Well, giving up is not an option, right? We need a functional politics. And again, especially people who don't have the resources to help themselves need a functional politics. So that if we're trying to help those people in our society, then we need a functional politics. And I would say, I keep saying the word we in saying that, and that's important too. we have to avoid the temptation to approach the political world as other people who do these things to us, and we just stand here and watch them and criticize them. At the end of the day, to be a citizen of a free society is to take ownership of that society's problems. And the question we have to ask ourselves is really, what can we do to help these institutions work better, to change the rules, to improve the system, to help it address the kinds of problems it's failing to address? It's absolutely crucial that we see these as our problems and our challenges, and not take the kind of easy path of being just the observer, just the pundit on the outside with nothing to offer except criticism. You find now a lot of people in our institutions taking that position. Members of Congress, I keep coming back to Congress because I spent a lot of time with members of Congress for my sins. And there's a tendency now to rather than be engaged in negotiation to address a public problem, to step outside, to find the camera, and to say, you wouldn't believe what happens in this place. And you want to say, well, you're in your 18th term in the House. You are what happens in this place. Why are you talking about it as if you're an outsider? That tendency, and you see it with Donald Trump, you see it with people who I think embody this kind of problem. They want to speak on behalf of a public that's frustrated rather than to address the frustration. And those are different things.
Well, that's, I think, a good time to transition over to you, to Sister Eilish, because you work at Network, which helps bring Catholics and people of goodwill to advocate and vote for issues that protect our freedom to be healthy, to care for ourselves and our families, to live on a healthy planet, and participate in democracy. So at the end of this month, you're kicking off a tour that's called Nuns on the Bus, a great name, to mobilize voters across the country and share election resources rooted in Catholic social thought.
Right.
So you bring faith and politics together in your work. In what ways can the principles of Catholic social thought guide young adults in making informed decisions about these political candidates and their policies? And what are the practical steps that we can take to put that into action?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It really follows up on some of what you just mentioned. So, when we are traveling the country at Network, when we're talking to our young adults across the country through our Young Adult Leadership Lab program, we're hearing, folks who at 18 in college, this is their first election that they are voting in. For many, it's also the first time that they're really paying attention to politics and understanding that it's our right and responsibility to engage. I always think about what someone told me years ago, you cannot remove yourself from an institution. When you do that, you lose your voice within it. And so what we're saying to a lot of these young folks across the country is this is the time to make your voice heard. This is a tenet of our Catholic faith, is to be engaged, to care for the common good, to care for others. And the way that works in our country is we talk about having a vibrant democracy, where all people have that opportunity to vote, to have their voice heard, to shape the politics and the policies of the country. And so, often we hear, well, does that matter? Does our engagement really matter? And we talk about right now, the Gen Z and millennials are the largest voting bloc in the country. So your voice does matter. This is the time that it does. And so it's how do we make those, the wants and desires that they have around policies, whether it's, the freedom to live on a healthy planet, so environmental, or we talk about the kitchen table issues, they want to make sure that they're able to pay rent after college or afford food or to take care of their families. How do we do that? We do that by participating in this system, in this institution of voting and democracy in this country. And so we learn about, all throughout all of history, there's always been those upheavals, and this is the moment in time that we are in, and it calls for our participation across the country.
I want to talk a little bit more about the Nuns on the Bus, but also your day-to-day work, where you're working with faith-based grassroots and organizing movements. What lessons can we draw from those groups in rebuilding our institutional trust? And how have you seen young adults get involved? How can young adults listening to this get involved?
Yeah, so I think, we talk about grassroots movements. So it is the movement of the people on the ground. And you can always find people who share the same ideals as you, who share that same desire. You know, we talk about to create a thriving community. So, you know, it's finding ways to get plugged in to that movement, to see what else is going on. But one of the things I find most motivating right now is on our college campuses is kids who are holding voter registration drives. And they're successful because it's peer-to-peer. It's giving them a chance to lead and to plug into that and to learn from others as well. But, you know, if one of my peers in college comes up and says, "Oh, are you registered to vote? This is really important to me, so it should be important to you." They're much more likely to say, "Oh,
Right.
you know, I'm not, let me do that now." Than if I'm there, or if a professor or someone else is there saying like, "Oh," and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's
No offense to
It's
professors.
no offense. Yeah, you know, but it's like who gets that message across?
Yeah, yeah.
And who is the most able to get people energized? And what we know is that like young adults don't just want an option for their voice to be heard, but want the option to be a part of the movement and to lead that movement. You know, so it's like calling like how do we create those spaces where that leadership is possible. And so, you know, we see that like on a practical level, it's the voter registration, it's sharing, we talk about multi-issue voting. So talking about how all of these issues, no matter what they are connected to one another. You know, so if I say, you know, for me, my background is in immigration work, that is a very important issue to me. But it's also connected to everything else.
Right.
And it's so helping to form that wider narrative for us.
Amazing, thank you. Brandon, I'm gonna come to you. I was laughing because you're a professor at CUA. You're a sociologist, actually. And you run, at Catholic University, you run something called the Institutional Flourishing Lab. So of course we had to have you be a part of this discussion. But in the lab, you study what it means for institutions to thrive in areas like business, science, and religion. What are one or two lessons that you've learned through your work at the lab about restoring this broken trust?
Yeah. Gosh, well, thank you. It's really a big challenge to figure out how to restore trust once it's broken. And I think it's more a question of rebuilding rather than restoring. I don't know if we want to go back. I think there are forms of trust that we used to have that are probably not worth having across a lot of these institutions, right? So, well, the three things that, you know, I would say there are a couple of modes of trust that we could talk about. One is sort of the public trust in various institutions, whether it's business or the Catholic Church or the government, right? And so, so that's kind of maybe more external form of trust. And then there's intrinsic to the institution, and I think both of them are eroding, and I think that's part of what's compounding the problem. And so we try to think about like what's causing the erosion at the external level, and Yuval's talked about a lot of these factors, but you know, one of them is certainly what he mentioned, which is something like constraint. So institutions enable and constrain us. We have to be able to you know, have certain roles that are defined by institutions. We live into those roles in order to serve society. So accountability is really critical, and once that breaks down, then there's a loss of trust. Competence is another factor, right? You expect basic moral competence, for instance, of your leaders and your institutions, and then when you see Enron or the sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church, you start to say, well, these institutions are completely dysfunctional, right? When you can't have basic levels of competence. Competence can go a bit too far, though, and one of the challenges you see is the loss of trust in science that's happened during and after the pandemic. And one of the challenges is people expect scientists to be like high priests and make dogmatic pronouncements on truth. And when scientists change their minds, then people say, we don't think we can trust you anymore. So there's competence, a bit of a challenge there, right? And but it's still, at least to some basic level, necessary. And maybe a third one is something like care, right? Do these institutions care about me? Do they care about people like me? Do they care about our interests? And part of that care is also conveyed through something like contact. Like, do I know people like this? Do I know a scientist? You know, do I know a politician, right? And once you do, then often you have the sense that they know me, they care about me. But if you say, well, there's no one who looks like me represented in this occupation, then it becomes a little bit harder to trust.
Right.
So those are some of the kind of external issues. Internally, what you see happening, whether it's in companies or whether it's in scientific institutions, and I think similarly for people who are engaged in politics, there are three other kinds of factors that we found. One of them is something like a sort of a survivalism. Let me just call it. I'm trying to come up with some acronym, but it's hard to do that. So I'll give you an example. I spent a bunch of time interviewing people in the corporate world, and there was this one policy that was really common in many corporations called stack ranking. And what happens is something like this. Imagine you're the middle manager in a major firm, and your mandate throughout the year is to build trust and camaraderie and loyalty and team building and all that fun stuff among your team of 10 employees. At the end of the year, you have to rank them on a scale of 1 to 10 and fire the one at the bottom, right? So that was a practice that was put into place for better efficiency, productivity, etc. But what people learn very quickly is the company doesn't care about you, so why the hell should you care about the company, right? So it completely subverts its own logic. And then you end up with a kind of mercenary attitude, and leaders are surprised. They're like, why are people losing trust in us? Well, you have a stupid policy, right? So that's one kind of thing. There are various sorts of things along those lines.
Yeah.
The second one is maybe something like role strain, where you're hired to do something, but then the resources available to you or what you're actually rewarded on is at odds with that particular thing. So if you're a scientist and you're supposed to publish scientific papers, but you end up doing a lot of administrative work and teaching, and you can't actually get time for research, and then you don't get promoted because you're not done the research, right? So you see a lot of people leaving academia and leaving science because of this particular kind of thing. So those are some of the kinds of issues that we see internally to organizations. And then the third one, maybe I'd say, is something like substitutability, where you feel like you're expendable, right? At the end of the day, you're seen as a liability by your leadership, and ultimately your leaders are simply there to protect the coffers of the institution. And so that's maybe a darker side of protecting the institution, right? So your integrity doesn't really matter, and so those kinds of factors lead to an erosion of trust. And leaders, I think, have a lot of responsibility in trying to figure out how to restore trust in that environment by cultivating a sense of safety through policies that are fair, by creating actually even being vulnerable and expressing that they've made mistakes, and offering ways to rebuild that kind of trust inside the institution.
I want to actually talk about maybe a case study of this sort of internal trust that you're talking about. At the Institutional Flourishing Lab, you did a study on U.S. Catholic clergy and bishops and what happened with the clergy abuse crisis. Can you tell us a little bit about that research very briefly, and in particular how young priests view the abuse crisis and their trust in the church as an institution? Just very quickly.
Yeah, so we did a national study of Catholic priests. We surveyed 10,000 priests and tried to get a sense of the extent to which they've been affected by the sex abuse crisis. And one of the big findings that surprised us was 82% of priests live in constant fear of a false accusation of abuse. And they think that if they were to approach their diocese or their bishop for help if there's a false accusation against them, they won't be supported. Often because they think that their leaders are mainly concerned about the survival of the institution and the financial survival. And so that's a really tough situation. One young priest told me, I've already got an apartment and a bank account for the day that the accusation comes, so that I don't have to live in my mom's basement. Right, so you see a cynicism that sets in there. So what the priests want, by and large, is they want due process. They want to know clearly, what is the policy? We want transparency around the way in which we're going to be handled and these cases are going to be treated. They want their bishops to be fathers to them and not bureaucrats. Right? They want care. They want to be seen as persons and not dehumanized. And that's another big aspect across a lot of our institutions where we feel depersonalized and dehumanized by our institutions.
Amazing. I want to transition over to you, Justin, and come back to some economic issues, because that's what you write about from a progressive perspective. And you also include frequent coverage of the Harris campaign's economic agenda. We know that young voters say issues like the high cost of living, student debt, the cost of rent and mortgages was referenced earlier. Those are front and center issues for young voters. In the presidential election coming up, where policy platforms sometimes seem overshadowed by personalities and vibes, what hope do you have that our political leaders will effectively address these challenges and these concrete policies? And does the Harris campaign's approach address young people's concerns and those that feel like they're left behind?
On the policy front, I don't have a lot of expectations between now and November. some speeches have been given, a few more, but it's all kind of glimpses, they're ideas, they're kind of reiterating certain points pursued by Biden, which are good. But I think overall what we're seeing is just, in terms of the campaign, is ratcheting up the turnout. And I think the campaign is doing a good job reaching out to younger voters. It seems to be a pretty quick mobilization, maybe not on par with 2008, but certainly a serious effort. This is a campaign that wants to win. Going back to economic issues, I think that the Harris campaign thus far is really, pursuing a course that's a missed opportunity. Bidenomics is not well regarded by the public, but that does not mean it's a failure. A lot of what's been pursued has been stuff that's been talked about in the Democratic Party since about 1983. Democrats have been talking about industrial policy since Ronald Reagan's re-election campaign, and so they finally pursued one. And it's not perfect, but it's commendable. Similarly with antitrust, there's been a serious push, and I think that's in some ways now regarded as the more threatening push by the Biden administration. You can see it in the attacks, the really brazen attacks on Lina Khan. I mean, we've seen pretty much open calls by Silicon Valley billionaires, the donor class, to have her replaced, to have her removed. So she definitely symbolizes a threat. She symbolizes a new tradition, that is Lina Khan. Not a new tradition, but a revival of an old anti-monopoly tradition that's definitely resurfaced in the Democratic Party, but just within a particular wing of the Democratic Party. So I think that in terms of the messaging, in terms of the emphasis on policies, it's mostly a safe course, kind of gesturing toward lowering the cost of living crisis, to reduce, trying to tamp down and make it a situation where we have an opportunity economy. And that's all well and good, but to really get at the root of the problem, you have to talk about pre-distributive measures. You have to really talk about the scale and the breadth of policies that this kind of thing would entail. And not just, I'm definitely coming from a social democratic perspective. I think that we need a wealth tax. I think we need a number of redistributive measures, bringing back the child tax credit and so forth. But again, we have this kind of patchwork platform that is kind of dancing around the issues. And I don't know, I think that it's not going to necessarily engage the split ticket voters and the irregular voters that are necessary to win in the key counties and the key swing states.
It's really interesting. Let's talk about our political parties, our two-party system that we have. They've long served an important role in our institutions and in our country, helping us channel and shape political and social energies and drive change. Everyone here has referenced that. But what is the state of the two major parties today, and what does that mean for our politics in the future? And in particular, are Democrats effectively reaching out to those who've lost trust in political leaders? You've said that, the Harris campaign's doing a good job reaching out to young voters, but for those of us who feel like these institutions have let us down, is that being addressed by either candidate?
The short answer is no, not really. I mean, with the Democrats, it's kind of a very improvised big tent. But what is the big tent about? And they've tested out a couple of themes. First, it was the kind of save democracy theme. And, I don't know, they felt like, it seems like that was not terribly effective, at least with Biden still at the top of the ticket. I think that, with the two-party system, yes, you have to reach out to different blocks of voters. And the Democrats are certainly in a tight spot because their regional strength has really declined. The blue wall is not really a blue wall. It's a very much eroded bulwark at best. And some very admirable leaders from the region, Tammy Baldwin, Sherrod Brown, are senators there in they're at risk of losing their seats. So the Democrats are keep coming back to this, like, how can they rebuild their party in states where they won handsomely in many elections, especially down ballot, even through the 90s, and including in the South too. And so there are pockets of revival. There's a turnaround. You see things where Georgia is becoming a more competitive state. You see North Carolina maybe. But this is not a party that is actually seriously committed to waging a 50-state strategy the way that Howard Dean talked about in 2005 and 2006. Oh. And I think that's definitely disappointing. With the Republican Party, I mean, what can you say? It's become this elaborate farce, but the consequences have been deleterious. And I think that in many ways, it's a party that doesn't cultivate leaders that know how to govern. They don't even pursue governing in major cities. So you have, they are also very much a regional party, and the message is almost uniformly negative. But you do see signs of them trying to exploit disenchantment with the Democratic Party. It's hard to tell where things go because Trump is still in charge. Yeah. I do think, and this is a little provocative for some of my friends on the left, but I think that any kind of reform tendency in the Republican Party is to be encouraged and welcomed. And it might actually come across some of these economic issues because the Republican Party now has a poorer base, a more downwardly mobile voice, and more downwardly mobile base, and they may be eventually compelled to respond to those interests.
I want to open up the conversation now with the panel. I'd love to hear your reactions to what you've heard. I have a specific question I want to lead us off with, though, and then I hope our audience will get ready to ask their questions. We'll come to you soon. I want to talk about the crisis of loneliness that so many younger generations are facing. I know this is a personal issue for some of us, for many of us in the room. And the crisis of loneliness is brought on by and exacerbated in part by social media. We have to talk about social media. How has social media contributed to the distrust we have in our institutions? And what's the role of social media to address the crisis that it perhaps has exacerbated? I wonder, Brandon, if you want to...
That's a really tough question, yeah. So, I think one of the things that social media has done is it's trained us, right? And it's trained us, especially during the COVID era when we had not much else to do other than consume social media. Yeah. And what it's trained us to do is to value, I think, charismatic leadership over what Max Weber would call either legal, rational forms of authority, which you could take the government and the kind of more bureaucratic forms, or traditional forms of authority that are people who are in particular positions, whether it's the president or the pope, right? And what you valorize, and it's not just in the U.S., it's across the world. You see it in various forms of movements. Is the valorization of charismatic authority, and you're a celebrity on social media. That's you know how to do that. You know how to value that. So I don't quite know, how can social media draw us to connection and to value these other forms of authority? That's one issue. With the rise of AI, that poses another challenge now, right? As there's the rise of AI companions, of various firms that are trying to be parasitic on our loneliness crisis and to create these AI bots and so forth. And can technology push us towards connection and towards genuine citizenship, towards service? I'd like to think it's possible, and perhaps it's happening in places, but I don't have a good example that comes to mind.
Yuval, I know you've written about this and talked about this, the crisis of loneliness and the role of institutions in addressing it. You also talked about how too many members of Congress are performing for social media and gaining followers. I know you, Justin, have also. Do you want to add anything here?
I think, I very much agree with what Brandon says, and I think one way to think about what social media does to us as citizens is that it causes us to confuse expression and action. It causes us to think that giving a thumbs up to something is doing something about it. And so we expend the energy that might otherwise go to actual political action, which generally involves some form of coalition building, of organizing in such a way that you actually have an effect on the real world. And instead, we have come to value various modes of ephemeral expression, so that even people who are moved to protest an injustice as they understand it basically think that just being out there in a protest is what's involved, whereas in effective protest movements in the past in America have been the above the surface piece of a much larger effort that ultimately involves actual political action. I think that a lot of younger Americans now might be confused by this notion of actual political action. What is that as distinct from just saying what your opinion is? Well, what it is working with other people. And that's what's not appealing to them about it. Social media has left us in a place where working with other people seems like it is unappealing and useless. And a lot of the technologies that have come into our lives over the past 15 years in particular have been what I call loner technologies. They're ways of letting us get what we need in the world without dealing with other people, right? So you can just use the app and a car will come, and you can even check, don't talk to me in Uber now, which is just, I mean, or you know, you walk into the restaurant and there's a bag with your name on it, and you pick it up and you walk out. And so you don't have to talk to people. Right, there was an effort in one of the supermarket chains in the Northeast, Acme, to get rid of the automatic teller. This is now just before COVID. It was in 2019, and they found this was extremely unpopular. And they tried to tell people, you know, it doesn't actually save time, and that's true. It doesn't save time. But what people ended up liking about it, they did a survey, and found that what people like about it is that you don't have to talk to anybody, and nobody's looking at what you're buying. This is not good for us. This is not the way to think about how our society should evolve in the 21st century. And I think losing the sense of the way in which our social lives have to actually involve other human beings directly in an embodied way is an enormous part of why we describe this kind of vague sense of unease we have as loneliness. We call it that because it means being apart from other people in a way that ultimately makes us incapable of acting.
Well, I know, just to brag a little bit about my faith, the Catholic faith, we have done a pretty good job over our 2,000 years of being on the grounds and lifting up the voices of the least of these, those lying wounded on the roadside. Sister Elisha, I wonder, do you have like a story or an example from your work doing grassroots efforts of sort of that gives an example to what we've been talking about here tonight? Give us a little bit of hope about the power of the people.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it kind of connects to everything so far. You know, we do a lot of our advocacy through social media, online, virtual, and there's a great place for that. But what we've learned is that it's the Gen Z, the kids and young adults are like clamoring for that attention, for the chance to be a part of something that they have not had the opportunity to be a part of, like those, like me and others. And so what we're saying is like, you know, like take part in the protests, take part in those events on your college campuses. Know what's going on in your town and where you're from, your city. But then we do lobby visits to connect that.
Yeah.
And so we're saying like, but bring those stories. Those stories hold power. Those stories, you are the voice that, you know, for so many of our elected officials who don't really have the chance to be on the ground and see what's happening. And so to bring that back and say like, this is one tangible way that you can help create the change in the institutions. You can help create change in policy and see how your role is valuable in that.
Sure.
So it's kind of like bringing it all together, but it's also saying like, you know, asking, you know, when you're reading your news or consuming your news, like think about it as part of the whole, not just the sensationalized aspects of it, but what is real and what is true that you're listening to.
Great advice. Justin, is there anything you want to add? I think we'll come to our audience next, so if my colleagues can get the microphones, we'll get that going. But while we're waiting for that, anything you want to contribute?
Regarding social media,
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard because as a freelance writer, I have to be constantly engaged and just constantly absorbing information. In some ways, it's been rewarding because a certain small network has been created where people share book chapters, they share advanced proofs of things they've written that are being published. I get exposed to a wealth of information, and in that way, and it comes freely, and that's quite a privilege as someone that's not a member of an academic institution.
Yeah.
But in terms of how young people connect through politics through social media, I think that it has further diminished, capacity to think about how to pursue associational bonds in real life.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to come back to the quality of life, the living standards issue. But honestly, if people had a little more economic security, I think they'd feel more willing to sacrifice something and participate more in their community, and to take pleasure in the small steps. I think there's a big emphasis on kind of radical change, and everyone has their ideals and their dreams for a better world, but sometimes it is better to just focus on more local issues, because those are also intractable sometimes.
Absolutely.
And they need to be dealt with.
It's a Catholic social teaching principle of subsidiarity, starting on the local level. Looks like let's open up to questions. We have a question right here on the aisle. Please stand up and introduce yourself. Yeah, you're good.
I'm Matt. I attend Holy Trinity, so right across from Georgetown. One of the issues, we've seen so many institutions fall, and one of the arguments that happened is 9/11 and the clergy sexual abuse scandal happened right to back. How can we bring the lessons we talked about, loneliness, building community, and lesson to either the Catholic Church and other institutions we want to reform? I'm sorry if none of you are, hopefully that question is about, I know it's about U.S. politics, but.
That's fantastic, yeah. The Catholic Church is an institution. I don't know, Sister Eilish, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I think it really goes back to one of the first points I had, is that when, people leave institutions for the right reasons, but when sometimes if we're saying I am frustrated because of X, so I'm going to remove myself. But when we remove ourselves, it's losing our ability to have a part in that conversation, to help heal an institution, to help create change, to make it more welcoming, to make it more inclusive, all of that. And so it's saying how do we all come to the table to have these hard conversations to build the church, the institution that we want to see for the people around us?
Brandon, do you want to respond? I know you did that study on the abuse crisis.
Sure. I would simply echo that largely. I think with trying to rebuild trust, I think that's one of the biggest challenges is figuring out what makes it worthwhile, right? Why continue? Why try to do this? And I think there are generally two pathways to think about it, and one is ethical, where we think about it, do I have a responsibility here, right? Have I been given something by this institution, and therefore maybe I have some obligation to give back? And I think that's a harder sell, especially with the government, or something that feels very abstract. The other pathway, I think, is aesthetic, which means to think about what is beautiful. Is there something beautiful about the Catholic faith, or about science, or about democracy, whatever institution it is, and to try and find that beauty and allow yourself to fall in love. Right, and then that gives you a different kind of energy. And I think we need to learn how to love the institutions that we value, otherwise we stand a good chance that they will continue to erode.
Beautiful responses. I see a hand up in the back, and then we'll come down to the front.
Hi, I'm David. First, I just want to thank you so much for coming in tonight and hosting this event. But my question for the panel is that how do you view the issue of moral disengagement amongst leaders across different realms? Well, not just the leaders, but also from voters as well, and how that has been exacerbating the divisiveness among this country.
Do you, Paul?
Moral disengagement. I think that the way that I think about that concept and that problem has to do with people taking themselves out of the whole, talking about other people as they, as them, rather than understanding them ultimately as part of a single unified society that we all have to belong to. For me, that emphasis is very personal. I'm an immigrant to the United States. I came here when I was 8 years old. I became an American citizen when I was 19. And when I became a citizen at the federal courthouse in Newark, New Jersey, the old judge who swore us in, I think he was old, I was 19, maybe he was 40, who swore us in, afterward he got up to give a speech, and he didn't talk about, the founders or Lincoln as I expected. He said something that seemed odd at the time, but has stayed with me. He said, from now on, you have to think and talk about America in the first person plural. And I will tell you that a bunch of immigrants in the room looked around at each other like, I'm glad that wasn't on the test. I don't know what the heck it means. And he told us what it means is you have to say we and us. And there is certainly a tendency among immigrants to this country to talk about Americans as they, that the big they that existed in my world as a child growing up. And to give that up and say, no, we is the challenge that a lot of Americans face, and it's certainly not just immigrants. It's a challenge that all of us face in looking at people who we think are doing the wrong thing for the country, or we think we have a very different of the vision of the good than we do, and we just say they. There's us and them. And the fact is, this is our common home here. We have to understand ourselves as living in one place, and the disagreements we have are about what would be good for that common home. Not just for some part of it, but for all of it. Those are serious disagreements. We have to take people seriously across those lines of difference. They really do have a different view of what it would take for this entire society to succeed and thrive. And if we can see it that way and have an argument about that shared question, then I think we're in a better place not to distance ourselves from the underlying moral roots of the kinds of problems we have. It's very hard to do now. Everything in our political culture encourages us to see ourselves as part of a team that is only part, and to see other people as separate and unconnected. And you've got to fight that in any way you can.
I think we have time for one more question. Someone down front here.
Hi, I'm Eileen. I'm with the Franciscan Mission Service and Franciscan Action Network. So I'm a recent college grad, so very much a part of Gen Z. And I know you were talking about how a lot of people join Congress or politics or become in a corporation to become famous. And, that's kind of become more the thing lately. And so a lot of my, people my age have been like, oh, just the only solution is kind of blow it up and say everything, just forget it. I don't think so, but I kind of don't know what those changes would be. So what would you say are the changes that need to happen for that dynamic to kind of go back to serving the people as opposed to people serving kind of themselves and their own self-image?
Justin, do you have a response to that or an idea?
Yeah, I mean, in 2005 to 2010, thereabouts, there was a big emphasis, or even going back a little bit further to McCain-Feingold, talking about limiting the influence of money in politics. But now, it's just endless. I mean, it's unfathomable, really, the scale. It blows my mind, and I thought it was, disgraceful when I was like 15. So, but if you can somehow, really redirect the national conversation to what service means, that might be hokey for some people, but I do think it's important, to maybe we need to see more of our political leadership up and down the ballot, spending more of their time, not just talking to voters, but really going to places where people aren't voting because they're too poor. They're too poor to vote. And doing some good community work. I mean, it sounds like boot camp for the elite, but people need some kind of proof that the service, the commitment to service is genuine, that they're, again, not just in it for becoming a career politician or the revolving door that we all know about.
I love that call to service. We're going to wrap up our conversation, but before, I'm going to preview some of our upcoming dialogues, as we always do, but I'd like to get a quick closing comment from each of you, and maybe we'll just go down the line in this order. But we always like to leave all of you with a concrete action or a step that you can take to encourage all of us in person and online to address this broken trust that we have in our institutions and leaders, especially in light of the election coming up. So Justin, I wonder if you could kick us off. What's an action step?
As a young father, I don't have a lot of time to volunteer, but I do look forward to the time where I can genuinely do that. In the meantime, I have been heartened coming out of the pandemic to become part of a new community of young parents in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. And it really has altered my perspective. It's altered my, I've always thought about, being part of something that wasn't tied to, getting bills done on time and all that sort of stuff. But it's nice to be part of something where you feel like there's a genuine level of care for each other and for each other's children, and building kind of a vision for the future among them.
Yuval?
I started in thinking about your first question and talking about how to be more trustworthy. And I think there's a way for each of us to think in moments of decision that confront us, not only what do I want, but given the roles that I have in my life, what should I be doing? As a father, or as a neighbor, or as a worker, or as an employer, or as a politician, or as a voter. Given that, what should I do here? I think the failure to ask that kind of question is the kind of failure that often shocks us in public life. You think, how could that person do that? And the habit of asking that question, and also of expecting other people, and especially people in authority, to ask that question and holding them to account when they obviously fail, I think is a step that each of us can take in the direction of a society that is more capable of trust.
Brandon?
Yeah, in my work on trying to figure out what it takes to change culture, there are three sorts of levers that I've found are critical. And one of them is narratives, right? And I think we do need a new narrative and a new imagination for a script that we tell ourselves around the status of our institutions. And I think what Yuval has suggested about really leaning into this we is really critical, right? We have a narrative that we've lost hope and everything's failing us. But I think we need a narrative that has to be cultivated around really reimagining that shared we. The second one is models, and we need leaders who model this way of behaving, and they have to really behave in ways that are exemplary. But the third one is habits, and those are habits that we can all cultivate. And maybe one thing I'd like to suggest as an invitation to you all is try to host a potluck dinner where you bring together people who don't share your political views and have a conversation around something maybe seemingly disarming, like beauty, like share a story of an encounter with beauty from your childhood. It's something that I've done in salon dinners over the last couple of years, and I found it really transformative for very diverse groups of people, both politically, religiously, racially, ethnically, to come together around something that allows you to confront the other as a human being and not as a title and not as a political party or whatever, but just as a person, especially as a child, or as a memory of a child. So something along those lines, I think, could be a small habit that allows us to really learn how to encounter the other in our divisive times.
Sister Elish?
Yeah, I think it is, finding ways to be in authentic relationship with one another and finding ways to be in conversation with one another. So it's as much as finding ways to bridge the divides, but to really talk about at the heart of it, no matter what side we stand on, that we value our families. We value making sure that we're taking care of our families, that we're taken care of. That may look different for how we describe it, but how can we get to a place where we talk about that bottom value, that we talk about those things that we all care about? And I think that, so there's that piece, and then it's finding ways to get involved, to find that community where you're around people that share the same interests as you, want to create change, want to see these visions of thriving communities really come to life in the world around them.
I heard care for others, ask the question, what should I do in my role lean into the we, host a potluck, I like that one, and be an authentic relationship. This has been a really rich discussion. I am so grateful to all of you. And actually, the potluck is a good segue. I want to invite everyone here upstairs to a reception, not quite a potluck, but to continue the conversation over food and drink. I also want to just preview some of our upcoming dialogues that we have. On Monday, October 7th, here at SCS, we'll be back in this space with a Latino leader gathering on seeking the common good in an election year, responses from U.S. Latinos. And that conversation will include Leah Garcia of the Archdiocese of Baltimore, Santiago Ramos from Aspen Institute, Father Agustino Torres of Corazon Puro, and Jasmine Ulloa of the New York Times. And then on October 26th, the Saturday, less than 2 weeks before the election, we're going to be collaborating with the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice to hold a dialogue on faith, discernment, and democracy, young people in the 2024 election. And that will be with Robert Costa of CBS News, Chris Crawford of Protect Democracy, Lauren Relaford from Children's Defense Fund, and Kate Scanlon from Our Sunday Visitor News. And then finally, we'll continue our analysis after the election with an in-person dialogue to explore how these principles of Catholic social thought can offer a path forward in a challenged, churched, and polarized nation with David Brooks, Carrie Robinson, Vince Rougeau, and Sister Teresa Maya. And there will be more information on our website. Please check it out. You can RSVP there as well. This discussion is recorded and will be posted on our website and social media channels, as Kim mentioned. I just want to say quick thanks to the School of Continuing Studies for hosting us, to all of our vendors here tonight who have made this night go so smoothly, and of course to my colleagues here at the initiative, Kim Daniels, John Carr, Christian Sunan, and Kimberly Mazik, for helping support this gathering tonight. And thank all of you for being with us in the audience and online. And finally, please join me in thanking our esteemed panel, Yuval Levin, Sister Eilish McCullough, Brandon Vadiyathan, and Justin Vassallo for being a part of this conversation. Thank you.